paragraph is a form of descriptive writing which is written on the basis of a given chart, graph, data, outline, clues, table, etc. It requires analysis and comparison of the given facts and drawing conclusions based on the given data. When writing an analytical paragraph, one should remember to describe the facts in the best possible manner and cover the information provided. The paragraph must use clear and crisp language along with providing complete details of the data provided in the question. Features of an analytical paragraph. Black circle, it describes the given chart, table, data, graph, cues, etc. Black circle, it should be brief and comprehensive but at the same time, include complete information. Black circle, it should state the facts that are provided. It should have simple and accurate language. It should mention figures and quantities appropriately. It should use the same tense throughout, as far as possible. It should not provide any personal observation or response. Black circle, it should preferably use the passive form of the verb. Format of an analytical paragraph: content in 100 to 120 words. The content of the paragraph must include the following: introduction, explain in 1 or 2 lines the context or what is clearly evident from the chart or graph. Body of the paragraph, explain in detail the figure and trends, making comparisons and contrasts. Conclusion, give the overall view or summary of the chart or graph. Points to remember. We must not include any personal opinions, conclusions or observations but simply stick to the facts. Black circle, we must choose wisely the important information, organize it well, state. The table suggests. The line graph shows. The data given provides information about. The pie chart illustrates, etc. The body of the paragraph, we should organize the information well. We should look for the large differences that are very prominent. We can mention the aspect which is the smallest or the largest in the data given. Any aspect that is similar should be mentioned next. We should further mention about the aspects that has remained unchanged or is inconstant throughout. If the chart or table mentions 2 different groups, we should refer to both of them in the paragraph. If there is any contrast or comparison that could be drawn, we must present it effectively. If the chart is about a particular time period or highlights trends of several years, we should mention about each year in a concise manner. If any comparison or contrast can be made for 2 or more years, we should write about that too. For describing the pattern of growth, we can use words and phrases like rapidly doubled, skyrocketed, striking increase, peaked, soared, declined, plummeted, leveled off, stagnated, fluctuating. Starting to rise, starting to fall, drop down, slightly, etc. Mentioning quantities, when including numbers and figures, the accuracy must be ensured. Quantities can be described in a number of ways, such as percentage, fraction, ratios, etc. For describing quantities, we can also use words and phrases like 1/3 of, nearly 1/4 of, majority, on an average, twice as much, almost equal, the highest, the lowest, approximately, etc. Black circle, for establishing relationship or contrast, we can make use of words and phrases like similarly, in contrast with, in comparison to, however, whereas, as opposed to, while, a striking difference, a noticeable difference, etc. For conclusion, we may use words and phrases like overall, subsequently, in all, in a nutshell, in short, therefore, etc. Types of graphs. 1. Line graph. 2. Bar chart or R-column graph. 3. 4. Pie chart table. 5. Multiple charts. 6. Process or cycle. 7. Describing objects. 8. Map. Introduction. How to write a graph. You need only 1 or 2 sentences describing the following: the type of graph you are describing, the title of the graph, date of the graph and scale. You need not have all this information, but you should report what you have. Body. What you need to do is to describe factually the graph. No specialized knowledge of your own is needed nor your opinion. You don't need to analyze the data. For example, you need not give the reason for why figures are high or low. Sometimes, when there is more than one graph, there is relationship between the two, and you can bring in some comparison between them, but going beyond this is not necessary. Ending. You need not write along an analytical conclusion. The introduction and the ending should be more or less the same. 1. The line or time graph vocabulary. All graphs which show changes over time, whether they are line graphs or bar graphs or a table, need this vocabulary. All line graphs are time graphs, but all time graphs are not line graphs. Time phrases. It is important that you know how to use the common expressions of time. In. A. In 2000. B. In the 20th century. C. In the first 10 years. 4. A. For the first 6 months. B. For 20 years. During. A. During the first 6 months. B. During the first half of this century. C. During the remainder of the year. From to. From September to November. B. From 2000 to 2005. Between and. Between 1960 and 1970. Started at, finished at. Note that you can refer to a decade as the 1980s, etc. There is no apostrophe before the S. 2 sentences to remember. From January to February, sales increased slightly. From January to February, there was a slight increase in sales. The above two sentences are foolproof sentences to get your sentence structuring right in the line graphs. Of course, you must make these sentences longer by adding data and also make changes to words like January according to your graph, for e.g. There may be years in the graph you get, but the basic structure of sentence remains the same. When you use the adjective-noun combination, then the three words, there was a, always precedes the combination. Talking about combinations, only two types of word combinations can be used in the time graphs, the adjective-noun or the verb-adverb. You must learn the relevant vocabulary by making a table like the one given below. Remain stable, there was a stability, leveled off, there was a leveling off. Using the right tenses. It is important to select the correct tenses. For most graphs, a specific time in the past will be given and you will need to use the past simple tense. If two things took place at the same time, you may use the past continuous tense for one of them. While laptop sale was rising during this period, there was no change in cell phone sale. If you use since or recently, it means that you're referring to events that have come up to the present. That means using the present perfect tense. The use of the internet has risen enormously since the 1990s. With by, you will often need to use the past perfect or the future perfect tense. By the end of the century, the rate of urbanization had doubled. 2. Percentage vocabulary. You should not keep repeating the same structures. The key language of percentage graphs is proportions and percentages. Common phrases to see are the proportion of, or the percentage of. This table presents some examples of how you can change percentages to fractions or ratios. If the percentages are not exact as above, then you can use qualifiers to make sure your description remains accurate. Here are some examples. This table presents some examples of how you can change percentages to other phrases. The words above are interchangeable, though number is for countable nouns. An amount is for uncountable nouns. How to incorporate data in the graph. There are two ways of incorporating data. 1. By using brackets, closing parenthesis. 2. By using which plus. Makes up constitutes. Black circle accounts for. Example sentences. White is considerably more common than blue. White, 55%, is considerably more common than blue, 20%. White, which is 55%, is considerably more common than blue, which makes up 20%. Red, which constitutes 28%, is almost twice as popular as blue, which is 13.8%. The other colors, which constitute 8%, are considerably less popular than blue, 20%. Grouping information. When you write a task 1, you should always group information in a logical way to make it easy to follow and read. With a pie chart, the most logical thing to do is usually to compare categories together across the charts, focusing on similarities and differences, rather than writing about each chart separately. If you write about each one separately, the person reading it will have to keep looking between the paragraphs in order to see how each category differs. Language of comparison. Comparative form when comparing two things. Then in comparison with as compared to. As compared to, with, then used when comparing things or people, especially when comparing numbers or amounts. Example. This year's profits are much higher as compared to, than, in comparison with, last year's. Mortality rates are lower for women as compared with, than, men. As against, as opposed to conjunction used when you are comparing two figures or pieces of information, in order to show how they are different. Example, the company achieved sales of $404 million, as against $310 million in the previous year. One study predicted that 42% of female university graduates would remain single the rest of their lives, as opposed to just 5% of male graduates. 3. Process vocabulary. The first step in learning to write about a process diagram is to see where the process starts and ends. This is important information as it will help structure your writing. The obvious thing to do is to start at the beginning and carry on until you get to the end. Some of the most useful vocabulary for describing a process is the language of sequencing. This means that you need to find language to say in what order each thing happens. The key here is variation. Try not to use, and then, all the time. Here are some alternatives. The first. The second. The next. A further. Eventually. This step involves, after this stage is complete at the same time, meanwhile. Finally. Finally.